Whoever in Quebec launching timber on the deck, where you'll break your bleeding neck riding on a donkey. Way, hey, and away we go.
Hey, Middle-earth role-playing fans, welcome to another edition of Middle-earth role-playing game by Iron Crown Enterprises. Today we're going to be looking at the Sealords of Gondor, number 3400 in this campaign series. The book talks about Pelargir in Lebanon. You get to challenge pirates in Haradrim as you sail across the Bay of Belfalas. Journey to Lebanon, the place of five waters, the province in the heart of Gondor. Weigh anchor in Pelargir, jewel of the mighty Anduin River, now home to the royal fleet. It is the finest port in the kingdom and the principal focus of the struggle against the Haradrim, privateers, Corsairs, and Umbar. Now this book was made in 1987. I bought it in 1988 at Endless Adventure. Paid probably $20 for it at the time, and it was a pretty cool book. Those who don't know, Lebanon is way down here. There's Minas Tirith, Lebanon, Pelargir. In Lord of the Rings lore, that's where Aragorn captures the Black Fleet and sails it up the river to relieve Minas Tirith during the siege of Minas Tirith and the Battle of Pelennor Fields. With him are Legolas and Gimli and as many men as they can gather in Lebanon. So yeah, they give a really cool map here for the region. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite fit. They cut it off. I don't know why they did that. Just an error, I guess. And it's just off-center too. What they should have did was they should have included this. They should have included this part down here, made it combined, and they could have taken a little more off the end wash. That would have been a little cooler. So it's a pretty cool map. You flip it over, and you have the city of Pelargir. Again, it doesn't quite match the layout. You can see here these walls don't match, so you have to there's a gap. Now I'm thinking if this is what they had designed for Pelargir, I wonder what Tolkien had in mind. Because Peter Jackson never showed the port city in his movie. He just showed a bunch of black ships on some docks, burning stuff as they went along. But no, Pelargir actually, there was a battle there, and it fell to the invaders during the War of the Ring. Now, how in-depth were the defenses and what was there at the time, and how many attackers were there? Because there were supposed to be 50 great ships and smaller vessels beyond count. So it was quite an invasion force. And I remember the men of Lossark, only 200 came to the capital when they could have sent 2,000. So where were those other 1,800 other guys? Were they down south? Did they get beat and retreat to the fords of Linhur? Or they retreated into the interior? Doesn't really say. Tolkien never goes into much detail or depth on what happened in the south. He kept mainly with his principal characters, the Fellowship of the Ring. So that's the map. I thought this was a really cool map. So let's dive into this book. We're not going to go through the guidelines and glossary of terms because it's just and converting stats because it just takes too much time. Now it gives a pretty detailed overview of the history of Lebanon, which I like. It talks about the coming of the Dain Coentis, who would be the ancestors of the Dunlenders. Coming of the Elves, mostly in the Ethelen region, in Belfalas. And it talks about the arrival of the Númenóreans. So they would have visited the coast, because the Bay of Belfalas was one of the closest points of reference to Númenor. The founding of Pelargir, or Pelargir, not sure how you pronounce that. Is the G hard or soft? Pelargir became the haven of the faithful, as opposed to Umbar, which was the haven of the kingsmen of a royal port. Pelargir was basically a haven of the faithful, even though it was so close to Mordor. Mainly because I think of its warm climate, as opposed to going, and it was a port, as opposed to going up to Tharbad and what became Arnor, because a lot of faithful fled there, which would have been safer with the elven havens nearby. Downfall of Númenor, the founding of Gondor, and the establishment of Lebanon. Lebanon became a province of Gondor, not a fief like Dol Amroth did, and Belfalas. The War of the Last Alliance, the decline of Pelargir, then the Ship Kings of Gondor. This is when Pelargir really hit his stride during the Ship King era. The quiet years of the Golden Age. The Schism, which happened when King Minalcar, when King Minalcar became Roman Daesel II, and his son Valakar lived with the Northmen and married a Northman princess, or chieftainess, whatever you want to call her. And that union ended up being the catalyst for the Kinstrife. The Kinstrife was kind of like was a civil war which pitted the purist, because Dunedain had become a little racist in some ways. They were pure blood was seen as a good thing, as opposed to mixed blood. And the royal family now was no longer pure blood, so Castamir the Usurper, who was a pure-blooded member of the royal family, gathered his supporters, drove Valakar out of Osgiliath, killed Valakar's oldest son Ornendil, and forced Valakar and his court and his followers to flee to the north. Castamir was not a very good ruler and alienated most of the people of the northern regions and in Belfalas. And finally he himself met his end at the Battle of Arui. Now the supporters of Castamir, including his sons, fled south to Umbar and took that as their city, and that became the Corsairs of Umbar. That's that in a nutshell. This is where you get the Corsair invasions that ravaged the coast and never quite stopped right up until the War of the Ring. You have the Great Plague. So that was the height of Pelargir, and Lebanon was Castamir the Usurper. That was at its absolute peak, and then it declined after that. The Great Plague would have decimated Pelargir. You have the changing years. So most of these books, they happen around 640 to the Third Age. And this book is no exception, but it does talk about what happened afterwards. So you have Tarandor and Telematar Umbardasel, which was the last time that Gondor conquered Umbar. But after his death, the Wainrider Wars erupted, and Gondor lost Umbar for a final time. The Wainrider Wars sapped the strength of Gondor, which culminated in the death of King Aranor at the gates of Minas Morgul. And then the ruling Stuarts entered, and a period of peace followed during the Watchful Peace. So by this time, Lebanon had now become less of a province and more of a fief themselves. Then you had the Balkoth invasion, which put an end once and for all of any hopes of reclaiming Dor Runin and the loss of Calenarden, as Calenarden was given to the Rohirrim, which was a good thing. And even Ithilien was now under siege with the loss of Minas Ithil during the last years of the kings, and the watch on Mordor had failed. And then we go through the second Corsair invasion, which was pretty brutal, as all along the Bay of Belfalas, Haradrim raiders swept and destroyed hamlets, raising the watchtowers and citadels of the South Kingdom. They didn't take Pelargir, but they definitely took its toll on the economy. The War of the Ring and the end of the Third Age. So by that time, the Anduin had become a buffer, as Harondor was lost, Harlithien was lost, and for Ithilien. So the entire province of Ithilien was lost to Gondor, and the Anduin had now become the border. Aragorn, under the guise of Thorongil, he organized a raid on Umbar, which 50 years prior to the War of the Ring, which stopped a preeminent invasion that was being planned that would have really hurt the Gondor. But Pelargir would have been the basis for, after the War of the Ring, for Aragorn to launch his plans to reconquer Harondor, reclaim Harondor, and reconquer Umbar. So section 3 deals with the land and the water, so this is just geography of what it encounters. Section 4 talks about the climate, weather conditions, nothing big there. Section 5 talks about the plants, fauna and flora, nothing too exciting there. Sea life, so you're going to deal with crocodiles in this one. Inhabitants, elves, which you're not going to really see too much of. The Druidane, again, you're not going to see too many any Druidane in this time period. They disappeared by the founding of Gondor, pretty much. Then you have the Dunmen, who are the Dan Lin and the Dan Quantus. What's left of them. They're splinter groups from the Oathbreakers, but they would represent some groups in Lebanon, especially in the highland areas. Then, of course, you have the Dunedain. The Dunedain make up the majority of the people in Lebanon, and there would be a lot of lesser Dunedain, mixed-blooded Dunedain. Because after the kin strife, a lot of Northmen entered service in Gondor. This section deals with politics and power. It goes mainly into the politics of the mid-Third Age. Lebanon is a royal province, so it's guided directly by the king and his representatives. And there would be a large standing military in Pelargir itself. The fleet would have its home in Pelargir. Talks about alliances and conflicts. Obviously, the conflicts are with the Corsairs of Umbar and the Haradrim, and control over Harondor. Warcraft, this is what I like. It gives you a basis. The army of Gondor, it's got the king or student. The wings are led by princes. Divisions are led by lords. Companies by captains, and lesser units by sergeants. Gives you a detailed number of warriors of Lebanon. So this, in 1640, there would have been 1,500 men-at-arms guarding the province of Lebanon, with another 3,500 militia. Section 8 deals with the economy, coinage and mint. So mostly it's seaborne trade. And then Section 9 deals with a layout of Pelargir. Tolkien never really mentioned too much about Pelargir, just said it was the ancient port. He didn't go into much detail on what it looked like, how it was set up, not like with Minas Tirith where he described the walls and stuff. So we don't really know what it really looked like. So I.C.E has just given their version, city plans, and it gives some key sites, main sites in the city, like the Hall of the Faithful, Guard Barracks, Sea Lord's Tower. And the city has only been attacked twice. It was put under siege during the kin strife, but and then it was also taken during the War of the Ring. So only twice has it been put to the test, the defenses. Keys to the city map, the lesser town. So it really doesn't give you a lot of things in the city. I.C.E could have did a book alone on this city from the looks of it. Like, you look at the city, it looks really cool. They could have did a whole book on this one. Kind of like a Thieves of Tharbad type idea, but they never did. Then it goes into some of the smaller cities or towns, Fanuland, which is down here on the coastline. Tolkien never really talks about any other. So Tolkien never really talks about any other cities or towns in Lebanon, just Pelargir. Aragorn comes down through in Lebanon, Kelembel and Ithring, down to Linhur, and then over to Pelargir. Then up through to by boat. Lossark is here, and it's technically its own little province. So in the book they create a Fanuland, which would be another town, and a layout for that. Some fishing villages, and a couple of small abandoned places. During the time of the Stuarts, and after the Kinstrife, there would have been Corsair raids, so a lot of little villages would have been abandoned, or there would have been more towers built, watchtowers and bell towers. Kind of like what happened to England after the Romans left, except for there was no massive invasions. It does talk about Belfalas. Linhur is mentioned, though it's in Dor and Ernil, but it's got a different. It goes into the marshes of the Ether. So I remember in the War of the Ring, Tolkien did talk about people from the Ether, and 100 more spared from the boats. So fishermen from the Ether and 100 more spared from the boats. So you would have marsh villages, people living in the delta. Here's a list of all the citadels, special encounters in the swamps. So you can get a lot of smugglers and stuff like that. Layout of the fort, okay. There's a layout of the fortress, Minus Daldor. And talks about a guy named Medlin the Mad. So this is a typical citadel you would find, and you can go adventure in. Nothing too crazy. Other sites of note, the hill, which would be from the Dunish period. And it gives a layout of the Tor and stuff. So I guess it's pretty complex underneath. Layout of the river Runda. So a subterranean river. And finally the Cenic tombs. So a Dunish tombs. This is more in the mountains with standing stones. It has their own little dead folk, though I don't think that's likely. It seems like the Oathbreakers and the dead were mostly in Sarn Erich. Now it does mention the royal island of Tolfalas, which is out in the middle of the Bay of Belfalas. By the War of the Ring, it would have been definitely depopulated and no more than a couple of watchtowers. Gondor probably didn't exert a lot of control over it, but neither did the Corsairs or the Haradrim because it would have been too far away, but it was probably deserted by that time. Okay, so on Tolfalas, they're trying to claim that there was Pukel men on Tolfalas itself. Highly unlikely, as they were not known to be seafarers. In Unfinished Tales, it does mention that there was a small tribe of them in Numenor, but that they eventually, as Numenor fell more and more into darkness, they left, and probably the last ones left when Sauron arrived in Numenor. But being on Tolfalas, I highly doubt it. So this is just, again, I.C.E tapping into inspiration, and it gives a whole temple complex for these guys. Highly unlikely, but hey, it's part of the adventure. This one I got really excited about, ships and seafaring, so Gondorian seacraft, and it gives the numbers of how many in the royal fleet. So there were between 35 to 50 ship captains at any time. So that tells you there's 35 to 50 ships in the Royal Navy at that time in TA 1640. There would be 1,000 sea warriors, so marines, and then 1,000 sailors. And then you'd also have local squadrons like a lord or prince. This is probably talking about Belfalas. So the prince of Belfalas would have 25 ships with 300 levy seamen and 600 hands and rowers. Now if you actually look at a bireme, you need more people to handle one of those. So again, it gives a breakdown of the royal fleet. The navy under the king or steward, the royal fleet, which would be a high captain, the wings under a lord captain, squadrons under a commander, and ships under captains. Gives you the tactics, so mobility. A lot of this would be coastal water, so a lot of rowing vessels, triremes, biremes. Big ones might be, what are they called, quadremes or quintaremes, whatever they're called, those big ones the Romans used, kind of like Roman Greek designs. Or they'd have sailed ones, like it does mention the Corsairs and the Haradrim, what they're using. Haradrim would have more of a clinker design, which would be kind of like what the Arabs used in the Indian Ocean, the dhow. Gives a section on privateers, pirates, and smugglers. Ship designs. So you gotta remember during the War of the Ring, when Aragorn took the biggest ship to be his own, it was a rowing vessel. There were slaves chained to the oars. That's why they couldn't jump off when the dead took over the ships, drove out the enemy from the ships in Pelargir, because they were chained. So the rowers were still there and they were slaves. Aragorn sent a Dunedain among them to calm their fears and they became free men and they were rowing upriver freely. So he was on in a oared vessel, so a galley. So you'd have a bireme, a dromon, which is a variation of the galley, a galley, quinquereme, which is a 2 or 3 banks of oars and 5 oarsmen, okay, manning each staggered grouping, okay. Progs, which is an ocean-going galley or dromon, a pentancanter, which is a galley or dromon with 50 oarsmen, and then a trireme. I was saying trireme, it's triremes. So the ships from Lebanon would be a fisher, a runners, and the Pelargir progs. And then it gives a list of the ships, the Gondorian ships. So a war galley would have 72 oars, and it would need a total crew of 195 men. So it gives you a pretty cool list. This is what I really liked about this book, was it gave you an idea for what the Gondorian Navy had in its full strength in that time period. And you have guidelines for using ships. I did ship adventures quite a bit with some friends of mine. It was quite fun. Then we have the ship designs of Umbar and Harad. There's 2 sections for them. So you have raider dromons, war dromons, slaver, quinqueremes, and heavy war progs, light war progs, war catamarans, stuff like that. Talks about time and scale, turning, rowing, shearing, grappling, ramming, all sorts of fun stuff. Finally, we go into the suggested adventures. Didn't really like the adventures too much. There wasn't a heck of a lot you could do. Lost scouts and lost streams, going among the ruins of an ancient tower north of Pelargir. I didn't like that adventure at all. Next one is a challenge, a chart, and a charmer. Yeah, nothing really big. Infiltrate a smuggler's hold. Lake of Lost Lords, looking for a treasure among tombs of Dunish royalty. Yeah, these adventures weren't all that great. We tried them and wasn't really our thing. A mad lord and a missing laundress. Kind of dumb. Vigilant Vaunts and Stone Stewards. So a trip to the marsh village of Tillenin. I don't know, they could have made better adventures than this. Suggested adventures like coastal patrols, a sea captain, Corsairs, becoming a privateer. That's what me and my friends did. I made them into a privateer and they could go try and take over stuff. So it wasn't the great. These aren't the greatest adventures. That was one of the weak points of this book, was the adventures themselves. We get our master military table, which is what I loved. I wish they had given for different time periods, and also given them one for the Umbareans and the Haradrim during certain time periods, like the Great Raid, the War of the Ring, and during the Kin Strife. You have local squadrons. They do have the Edain and Umbar. So they do give you a list of the stats, but they don't tell you the numbers. And it has Dunman and Marshmen. So I wish they had given different time periods for the master military table. Would have been really cool. You have your list of NPCs in all the various locations, and the NPCs for the adventures, and finally your master beast and master encounter tables, which are pretty standard, and a glossary of nautical terms. Overall, I really enjoyed this module. It was an area that Tolkien never really explored too much, even in Unfinished Tales. He talks about the haven of Pelargir, but doesn't talk about anything else. Lebanon is just mentioned as the place of rivers that Legolas falls in love with. But I highly enjoyed the military tables in this book and was able to use it in the map. I love the map. Map was great. It also connects with some other maps, kind of. Some things you have to play with a little more. And I wish they hadn't created that gap in the map. But Pelargir could have been used as a standalone module itself with Lebanon, and they could have did more with it. But they can't make it too pricey. But I did enjoy this book. Any Middle-earth role-playing fans out there, let me know if you guys had this book and what you guys thought of it. Were you able to play with it? I actually had a model ship, a wooden ship. So I had guys go up on the mast, like use little figurines to show positions and stuff. It was really cool. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. Leave comments in the comment section. Hit the like button, subscribe, whatever. Until next time, this has been Roman Dayslam out of here.
You ever round Cape Horn where the weather's never warm? Wish to God you'd never been born riding on a donkey. Way, hey, and away we go. Donkey riding, way, hey, and away we go. Riding on a donkey. Was you ever in Miramichi where you tie up to a tree and the girls sit on your knee riding on a donkey? Way, hey, and away we go. Donkey riding, way.